Yeah, we met last week.
We're waiting for Nathan, hi, I'm Jerry Baker. It's nice to meet
Okay,
you.
let's get started, and
And-
we'll do our big picture announcements first. First, I want to say happy birthday to Carrie tomorrow.
Yes.
So, and here's the birthday list and the prayer list.
Pray for the birthday people.
Let me tell you something, the email that Kim sent out, I really appreciate that. We got a response back already from the Tebows. They're out of town this weekend for Mother's Day, but they would like to participate in at least giving for some of the school supplies, etc. And if any of us want to pool in with that, let's do that. We've got till the summer to do it, so let's talk about it. Do you want to say, Ken, anything else about that, about the either the Food on the Move, or we really need volunteers, right?
Yeah, that's what I said when we first saw each other this morning. The money is certainly welcome, but what we need the most is volunteers.
Manpower,
Manpower. When we met, I don't know, 2 meetings ago, Heather talked about each of these efforts, each of these programs. And she was very close to dropping the Food on the Move simply because of the manpower that we struggled to get. We need 3 people a day for 7 weeks, and so it's a lot of time.
It doesn't have to be the same 3 people.
It's only for 30 minutes. We don't touch the food. City Square, our partners, our mission partners, handle all the food. We're just there to keep the kids company.
Right.
It does touch the lives of a lot of children. They want to make sure that they're fed during the summer when the school's out. And so, that was, we all kind of set on the mission, let's not drop it, let's try to fund it, so that's what we're doing. The rooms at the end, kind of the same thing. What Heather had hoped was that other churches would follow our lead. And when she met with the Austin Street leaders, what she found was there weren't a lot of churches that followed our lead. She was looking for a bigger impact. And so when she discussed maybe not doing it again, the Austin Street Center leaders basically said, you may not have touched many women, but the women you touched, you really affected their lives. And so she really wanted us to continue. And we did too. So, but it does require some effort. I suggested to you, there's already one, I think June there's already a group that's volunteered their services to cater the food, serve it. And so I was thinking we could take one of the others in July or August and do the same thing. It'd be pretty easy to get, catered food from, say, Blue Mesa Grill or something like that.
And we serve it.
Yeah, you're serving 20 people.
You can bring, some Sunday school classes cook it. And the favorite meal last year that I witnessed was hamburger.
Yeah, it was a hamburger.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because they don't get that. They get casseroles. Other churches have casseroles down there and things like
Did you
that.
cook them there?
We cook them, actually, kind of funny. Jason Woodbury was doing this, and he came in with these beautiful big patties. And one of the residents had a gas grill in one over here on Resident Row. And I don't know if they didn't check it out first or not, but it never did get hot enough to cook them. So we had access to the kitchen. We don't usually use it except for cooking, but he cooked them there.
Nice.
So but that, even hot dogs, anything, they don't get.
Yeah, it would be good.
like
Let's think about that as a class. Sounds like June's covered, but we'll be thinking about that.
June's food serving is covered. I like you and I signed up for driving both ends, but I told Chad, Heather's husband, who's organizing it all, I said, I sent him an email and just said, look, here's what I volunteered for, but if you wind up with some holes, feel free to move me around and stick me wherever you need me. I don't really care what I do.
Okay, then you said the word, organizer. Each session needs somebody that will take charge.
Right.
And make sure that the positions are filled, or some we've been able to cover. Like driver to go pick them up, take them back.
Yeah, it's all simultaneous.
Dinner, lunch, you need people to just come and eat, because we put you need people to help set up, because we have place cards for everybody, so that we mix with them. And set the table. The tables are set up, white tablecloths. Usually we have some flowers in there. It's really very nice.
It is
But
really
then, we had to set up the tots, right? So-
Yeah, Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, we do Friday.
And then we
do
have to
Saturday.
have a group, and we're talking about 2 people. You and
Well,
I did
in
tots.
the links that Cam sent you and in the Sunday school
Yeah.
link that I sent
It
you.
outlines all of that.
Both of them are there. You
Good.
can get on it. The sign up genius list are there. I did that sign up genius for Heather and then signed it over to her.
But
And,
let's give
I
it
did
an
last summer.
organizer.
But
for
anyway, it's a
one
way
of
to get all the job slots taken care of. Let's go to other, we have other larger requests. I want to give Jakob some time here and we'll go, I'm looking quickly at other announcements. The Wilshire at the Lake next Sunday, 5 to 7. Winfrey Point, I don't know where that is, but I'm sure it's on the map somewhere. But 5 to 7 on that one, and what to bring is by alphabet. So take a look at the back of that one. Yes,
Okay, when you get through,
I'm
I'll do
done.
something. Oh, okay, I just wanted y'all to know that Jacob was our Bible study leader when we went to Branson.
Nice.
And he did the most wonderful job, so welcome.
I can't imagine anybody had more fun on that trip than I did.
that's great.
Jacob traveled to all his older adults, yes.
Well, thank you for being here. Happy Mother's Day. What a lesson. Okay, thank you. You're
Thank
up.
y'all for
Yeah.
letting me be here. It feels like it's been way too long.
Yes, it has.
Yes.
It's y'all. Okay, how many of you are native Texans? That's a pretty good number. All right. We're starting in the most obvious place today with the rape of Tamar, which is the Alamo. So tell me the story of the Alamo as best we remember it. Few against many. Yeah. How'd it turn out?
We remember it.
We remember
Yes,
it.
thank you.
We lost.
Yeah,
We lost the
We
battle.
lost.
That's why the Remember the Alamo at San Jacinto was so important.
Why? There we go.
Yeah.
Why is it so important, Jerry?
Well, because we were fighting, we were not only fighting for our independence, but we were also fighting for religious freedom. Because one of the reasons that began this whole thing of being, separated from Mexico was that the Mexican government wanted us to become Catholic. And so that was
Give up our slaves.
to give up our religious freedom. And so that was one of the big deals, although I'm a DRT, and even though the Daughters of Public Practice is a secular organization, we did fight for our religious freedom.
Okay. That's good. So, Alamo didn't turn out so well itself, right?
No,
You said
no.
depends what I asked. What did you mean by that,
Well,
Charles?
in the short run, everyone was slaughtered.
Everyone
Yes,
was
yes,
slaughtered.
killed,
Yeah.
yes.
So the Alamo itself is just this tragic story. We okay with that?
Yeah.
All
And
right.
by the way, it still is.
Still
Because the
is.
General Land Office took the Alamo away from the DRT, so that's a whole nother
Okay.
story. But
Yeah.
it still is. It's a terrible
So
situation.
where does the story of the Alamo find any redemption? I guess where does that change? You said depends on,
Because of what it inspired.
because of
Yes,
what it
yes,
inspires.
yes,
Thank you.
Remember the Alamo was always.
Y'all are just like a
the battle
planet.
cry. Yeah. That was the battle cry.
Remember
the Alamo.
So,
So-
over here, and I'll read.
These are all, I mean, the language you're using right here is really important. This is why I'm asking leading questions, because I'm going to come back and remind you of the exact language. I hate leading questions, you drive me crazy. I'm like, what does he want me to say?
Yeah.
None of that. You're just perfect. So, what exactly does the tragedy of the Alamo inspire?
To keep fighting.
That-
Fighting and
The
praying.
next battle, and
The next battle.
somebody help me with the name of the next big battle, where we win our
One that's
independence.
San
San Jacinto.
San Jacinto.
San
I thought-
Jacinto.
I've been to
Okay.
the monument, the San- that was San Jacinto.
This is a really good framework for the story we're talking about today. Yes?
When I was a kid growing up in Houston, San Jacinto Day, April 21st, was a school holiday. I mean, yeah.
We're talking about the rape of Tamar, one of the royal family this morning. It's a really tough passage. And I'm showing you my card right here at the beginning. In the story itself, there's no redemption. It's tragic. It's the Alamo. The only way that the story finds any redemption is if in our hearing of it, it inspires us to protect, first of all, in this story, women who have no one to protect them, nor the power in the society to protect themselves. To stand up for those who have no voice in the story or power. That's the only place this story has any redemption, and it's in how you and I choose to carry it with us and say, never again, right? That's part of the battle cry of the Alamo. This Alamo doesn't happen again. And so like this rape of Tamar, we decide to stand out. So that's that. I want to show my cards on that moving into it, lest you hope we're going to find some jewel in the text that makes this story palatable, because there's not. This is not a happy story. It doesn't have a happy ending. And there's no way to maneuver the story to get it to serve our uplifting Bible story, give us passion or courage or hope, the way I want Bible studies I teach to go. This isn't one of those stories. This one hurts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why I think it's preserved in the text as it is, without that upward, kind of bend at the end. Okay, so we'll go ahead and jump into it and read the story now, starting in 2 Samuel, chapter 13. And we'll just read all the way through. 2 Samuel 13, verse 1 through 22 is where we're going.
We can break it up into, yeah.
Yeah, so how about someone we'll just popcorn read it. Start reading, read a few verses or however many you feel like, and then stop and let someone else start reading. It's fair plan.
Some time passed, and David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And David's son Amnon fell in love with her. Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shemiah. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. He said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me? Amnon said to him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister.
How do you say it, John?
Jonadab.
Jonadab said to him, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat, and prepare the food in my sight, so that I may see it and eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, so that I may eat from her hand.
Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down. She took dough, kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. Then she took the pan and set them out before him, but he refused to eat. Amnon said, send out everyone from me. So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber so that I may eat from your hand. So Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. She answered him, no, my brother, do not force me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do anything so vile. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the scoundrels in Israel. Now therefore, I beg you, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her.
Then Amnon was seized with a very great loathing for her. Indeed, his loathing was even greater than the lust he had felt for her. Amnon said to her, get out. But she said to him, no, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me. But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her. Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for this is how the virgin daughters of the king were clothed in earlier times. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her.
But Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar remained a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of all these things, he became very angry, but he would not punish his son Amnon because he loved him, for he was his firstborn. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had raped his sister Tamar.
And this is the word of God.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah, such a strange way. Can you imagine that being read on a Sunday morning? And this is the word of the Lord, and then we all stand and say, "Thanks be to God." Right? It's sour. It's just wrong. There's something very wrong about that.
What is
So-
the significance of tearing of the clothes? You read that in a lot of passages.
Yeah. Mourning. It's this
Shame.
dramatic act of mourning,
Dramatic act
of
of
shame. It's the bearing of, so the sleeves, it's a robe with long sleeves to signify she's a virgin. She's covered up. And so the tearing of the sleeves off in particular is bearing all this skin to show that she has been laid bare. Yeah.
I think some sects of the Jewish faith still do that, Orthodox.
Don't the Jews do, Jewish people do that?
They did in the movie,
The jazz singer?
yeah.
No, this is what I was just saying.
Yeah.
The jazz singer that he did, and his father was an Orthodox.
Yeah,
And when he did,
tore his sleeve,
tore
and
his sleeve.
the woman said, "Why do you do that?"
Yeah.
That's what Jews do when someone dies. Who's dead?
Yeah.
I
I
am.
think- yeah.
It's deep.
They do when they die.
Deep sadness, pain, grief, shame, these emotions that are too big to just go around walking with your head up, right? So something has to be done, not just in the emotional world, but some physical thing is torn and ripped to kind of signify the ripping that's going on, the tearing of your soul that's happening as someone you love or something you love is taken from you, and in this case, by force. There's a lesson on grief there, in particular, and how we try to, just walk around sometimes as if nothing's happened. That's me talking, not the point of this.
That's what I wondered too. Why did she do all of that instead of just trying to cover it up?
Right.
No one would have known.
Part of it is, so it's really interesting in this text because the way it's told is very crafty. David is never referred to as her father. Tamar is never referred to as his daughter. It's always the brother of so-and-so, or this or that. Usually the brother of Absalom. Amnon refers to her as sister to David when he's asking for her to be sent to him. But that's about it. That's one of the few times that she's referred to as sister. The rest of the time he refers to her as my brother Absalom's sister, or half siblings in the first place. When David comes to Amnon to visit him, David doesn't come. Amnon's father doesn't come. The king comes to visit with his power. And he sends for Tamar, not his daughter. He doesn't go tell his daughter to go. He sends for Tamar and says, "Go do this for your brother." The king does, not her father. The king sends for. What was the question?
Why did she do that? Why did she not just cover it?
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. I needed this direction. I was like, I'm really going somewhere with this, but it's gone right now. So that's one thing. And in the beginning, Tamar has no voice in this story until it's too late. the men have voices. Even in the beginning, she is the sister of Absalom. She's in relationship to all of the men in the story in the very beginning. Very little identity of her own. She doesn't speak. She has no speaking part, no speaking part, no speaking part. Right up until she's told, come into the room. And she says, no. And her response is really interesting too. Not no, this is improper, or no, I don't want to. No, it's the wrong order. Send to the king, and he wouldn't keep me from you. She knows her place, and that's a terrible way to say that.
Yeah.
But she's an object in this story, and even in that, she's trying to maneuver that to something not as terrible. No, the king wouldn't keep me from you. And as we learn at the end of the story, he's the firstborn, the loved. Amnon is the crown prince. Our stories should read King David, then Amnon, not King David, then Solomon, because Amnon is to be the king. And so, no, what would David spare her? So she finds her voice, she speaks out no. He throws all the servants out of the room to be in there alone with her. And she says, and then after the act, he has her thrown out. And she says, no, this is even worse than had it never happened in the first place. So all of a sudden, she has found her voice, her what sense of honor that she can keep and muster. She's found it right here in the story, and it's at this place of being abused and suffering. And so she's thrown out. And my reading of the story is this tearing of the clothes is this continued. We have a woman who's finally found her voice in the story. She's finally found her honor. And even though it's in suffering and even though it's painful, she's not going to give up her voice or her honor in this. The shame is going to be Amnon's, not on her. So she rips it as in mourning, as in shame for what was taken from her, not given away. She's not a harlot, she's not a virgin who gave. This isn't what there, as one who's been raped, as one who's had her virginity stolen, ripped away from her the way that a mother or a father would be taken by death. And so she's holding on to.
This commentary down here just says that thus expresses her anguish in announcing that her virginity had been violated.
Yeah, it's not a. And so the shame in this, it's a way to point the blame back toward Amnon. And so.
Because I didn't know till, I think they say in here later, she would never be married because of that.
Right.
So I didn't know that part. And when I read that, it's like, I keep quiet.
Yeah, so she could have, right? That's an option. She keeps quiet, she marries, and she just carries with her deceit for the rest of her life. May turn out better, but I think we have a woman who's done with deceits at this point. I don't know. I'm reading into the silence. What are your thoughts?
I can't help but like draw the modern day parallel to men of power and women who were abused, who may have stayed silent because they feared the implications for their career, right? And there were all these women in the paths of these men who took advantage of them.
Right.
And now they have found a voice, and ultimately the outcome is better but they risked a lot. I mean, she risked everything to show her grief and to bear her shame. But then you also, I wonder if she knew herself and knew just human nature well enough to know that it would be more awful for her to walk around hiding this forever, that it would destroy her more to hide it than it would to point a finger, which now ultimately we have come to.
Yeah.
And now because of that, there's so many people who are freed from their shame because they weren't the only ones.
Right.
Isn't it doubtful if there were many secrets in those palaces?
I can't imagine. Amnon doesn't seem like the kind of person that would keep a good secret, but.
I don't think, there were servants everywhere,
Uh-huh.
and they were, it's just not really possible if they think people know what's
Maybe.
going on.
The
Yeah.
society in general didn't seem to be much of a secret-keeping society. Everything seemed to be pretty out in the open.
Our Bible stories may be posed sometimes, but they're never photoshopped like
Right.
we do now, you know what I mean? In other words, in those days, it's told from their standards then. But now we take pictures and instead of just posing them, we sometimes dress them up a little, you know?
Right. No, I think that's a really good question. I think what I don't want to do too much, because the scene is set up where we could believe it's kept a secret. The servants are sent out if we wanted to. I just want to be weary of taking away any more of her agency. That I like the idea, and this is just, I'm telling you, there's nothing in the text to suggest one way or the other. But I like the version of the story where this is the choice she makes, where she's not forced into, but she makes a courageous decision to keep her honor, to say, me too, right? And point the finger back at Amnon, knowing it's going to cost her everything, and it does. And it does, right? Yes?
Don't you think, I just think this is so interesting that Amnon, he was seized with very great loathing for her, greater than the lust he had for her. It's like he's disgusted with himself,
Yeah.
that he would do that, although he was so in love with her.
They're projecting it onto
Yeah, and that's
her.
strange that,
Yeah.
you know, instead of being, you know, male macho, I guess, you know, I did this, I conquered this, you know, she's mine, whatever, he just has a whole different attitude about it.
I think it's a
kinda strange.
supreme insight into just the human condition.
Mhm.
Supreme insight into there after we obtain the objects of our lusts, not just sexual, but in all the areas.
So I thought the downstream story after this was telling. I thought it was I thought it was more fascinating than this story itself, because I think it was God's way of getting back at David for Bathsheba.
Yeah, that's what I was just wondering. Yeah.
You know, Amnon was heir to the throne,
Yeah.
so by taking care of him, by having this happen, it was a repayment to David for.
Yeah. I don't want to go that far. I don't think we have to say God is the initiator of this. This is just sort of, there's a proverb that says, you know, you reap what you
Right.
sow.
And that's what
Right.
I was thinking too, along the
Yeah.
same lines, like Amnon is modeling what his father
Right.
Yeah, it's
did,
right.
right?
like father, like son.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
This
same
is-
blatant abuses of power that the father practices in regards to women in particular, the son watched, saw, and now.
But this is it's good to be king attitude.
Yeah, and you see it at the end of the story, verse 21, when King David heard all these things, became very angry because he would not punish, but he would not punish his son Amnon because he loved him, for he was his firstborn
What
son.
I was thinking was, he's not the firstborn, is he? What about the child who died?
Amnon was already alive
Oh, okay.
before
So
Bathsheba
before that
ever
happened,
came.
I wasn't sure about
Okay,
the
several
order on that.
wives.
Thank you for asking.
So he's
Yeah.
not Bathsheba's son?
No.
No,
Okay,
no, no,
because I-
Bathsheba is not.
The first.
Yeah, there's a whole Solomon's probably a little child, while these are adults doing, this thing. Samnon. It's not the point of the story today, but Solomon is not the heir to the throne, ever. Ever. He's a usurper. At the end of David's life, when he's sick and on his dying bed, maybe he has Alzheimer's, dementia, or whatever, Bathsheba maneuvers it thus that Solomon usurps the throne, and one of his first acts is to kill the rightful heir, to kill General Joab, who has been David's general all these years. Joab supports the blood heir, and Solomon kills both of them. And so that's a part of the Solomon narrative that we don't hear very often. So,
Wouldn't it have been interesting if David had remembered Nathan coming to him and telling him the story, and David realizing his sin
Yep.
at that point with his son?
Yep. David becomes a really, I don't want to villainize him, but it's really hard not to at this part of the story. He is passive, he's off the scene. His absence as a father and even as a king leaves all kinds of vacuums in the family and in his kingdom that have catastrophic effects. So this story, and what Ken is talking of, how it plays out. So go to verse 20. This is Absalom. This is David's third son, Absalom is. And these are his words to Tamar, which kind of have a double meaning. Has Amnon your brother been with you? Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. Tell me how you read that, I guess. What's he
Keep your
saying?
mouth shut.
Keep your mouth shut.
But she didn't keep her mouth shut. She left the room, tore her clothes, and
Yeah,
so
exactly.
these are like contradictory things to me.
Is there any other way you can understand that? Read it again.
I bet he's gonna take care of it.
Yes. Yeah, that's the implication.
Just hang on it.
Yeah.
Sit tight.
It's
Not
not,
deal with it.
so my initial reaction, the first level of meaning that I get is, this is somebody shushing another woman who's crying foul against a man. Shh, be quiet. But I don't think that's what's implied, especially as you read the rest of the text. He says, be quiet for now. For now. Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. Take heart. I've got you. And so Absalom goes on to, and this is over the course of years, he ends up inviting Amnon to a dinner and has Amnon murdered, stabbed to death. Absalom flees to a city far up north that's anyway, takes flight seeking refuge from David's anger, because now it's his firstborn son who's been killed. David is still impotent in the story. He does nothing. He responds in no such way. He lets him run. Finally, and this is the really interesting thing, his general Joab, who Solomon will eventually kill, comes to David and says, your son's up there. Have him brought home. This is no way for the royal family to live. You have to make good with your son. So David relents, allows Absalom to come back to Jerusalem, but won't see him. So he invites him near and is still not connected with him at all, which I imagine is to be worse than being far off. It's so over the course of years and years and years, it festers and grows. And eventually Absalom starts maneuvering for his father's throne. I don't know what's gone on with the second-born son. Maybe Absalom wants to usurp the second-born son. Maybe the second-born has died. I'm not familiar with that. But he starts maneuvering for his father's throne, and we're not told whether he's trying to take it from David or whether he's just trying to put himself in the natural succession plan. But his general Joab, who argued for him to be brought back forward, Absalom goes out to the city gates and holds court, where David should have been holding court from time to time, letting the townspeople know that he's there, hearing their cases, doing those sorts of things. So Absalom goes out and begins doing this and says, oh, you know, we should have a king that does this, shouldn't we? Yeah, you should. That's not an untrue statement. And so David leaves the door wide open for him through his just impotence through this whole story in every way. And eventually, Absalom, Absalom raises support and takes the throne. And David, rather than fighting, and at that point could have probably overwhelmed Absalom and destroyed him, but David will not fight his son. So he takes his supporters and flees out into the country, just further showing his passivity in this story. Whatever shell that made him strong and brave enough to kill Goliath and to raid Philistines is utterly gone. And the beginning, you have to wonder where the beginning of that downturn for David is. And the Bathsheba story seems to be a pretty
Kind of that's the way I saw it.
He's carrying the guilt.
Yeah.
He's carrying the guilt, something there. It's already begun because typically, so when the Bathsheba story happens, it's the time when kings are out making war, right? And Joab is out making war for David, and David's already at home, just lounging.
That's the first thing.
Right, so it's already, this downward spiral of David's passivity has already kind of begun at the Bathsheba story, but it gets worse as it goes. And so eventually David's pressed out of the city. Joab raises an army for David to fight Absalom's army. They have a battle. Absalom gets caught, his hair's long, caught in a tree. David has given specific instructions for nobody to kill Absalom. And Joab says, yeah, somebody has to kill this guy because the king is crazy right now and not thinking straight. And we just can't survive any more craziness. So he kills Absalom while he's hanging from his hair in a tree and tells David the news, and David weeps for his son Absalom. First time we get any emotion, really, about this from David. He weeps for his son Absalom. And Joab asks him, man, there so many men bled and died for you to take your throne back, and you don't weep for them. You weep for your son, the usurper. And so you see David's guilt just sort of snowballing. And this is a really difficult, the whole storyline is really difficult because there's no right thing to do. David shouldn't, you'd be hard pressed to make a case that he should have just killed Absalom in the first place because it's just so muddy and so gray. And the whole story is chock full of, there are no right turns or clear right answers that can be made. It's just an absolute mess.
Well, you know, he must have been just tortured because these were his children.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you say to yourself.
Sons. These are his sons.
Right.
Yeah.
But you say to yourself as a parent, oh, is there anything my child could do to make me turn my back? No. Well, what if one hurts another one? What do you do?
Yeah.
What do you do? Where do your emotions go? Where do your loyalties lie? Well, this one? I mean, that's impossible.
Yeah.
And he has all
It's
this,
still just his sons, though.
yeah. And he has all this grief over his sons, but like what happened to Tamar
Right. No,
is
it's
awful. And
even in
there's
this
nothing
story,
mentioned.
I still
He
think
doesn't
it's
agree.
the Bathsheba thing. I mean, even if he thought, well, I'm gonna bring Amnon in and he's gonna go to trial. He's gonna, there's gonna be judging on this. He's still thinking about what he did himself. It's that first sin that he can't get away from. He can't, it's wrapped his head around it.
Which is why he grieves Amnon, not
Yeah,
Tamar.
Right.
It's why he's
Because
so
he
sad
felt
and angry,
responsible for it.
because he hurts for Amnon.
Is it also a matter of prestige, a little cover-up for the royal family there? The prestige of the king?
You know,
Or would people even care in those days?
it doesn't really seem like David cares.
Uh-huh.
He seems so
Yeah.
just, that, and his power is just utterly absolute right now. There's no, I don't know, maybe, it's hard for me to say.
It seems like a fulfillment of Nathan's prophecy.
Mm.
You know, where Nathan said, I will, oh, thus says the Lord, I will raise up trouble against you from within your own house.
where was that again, Laura?
That's in Samuel, it was last week,
So that was against David's house, not Saul's.
yeah, against David's house.
So that's kind of why.
That's where you were talking.
Yeah, you're saying God had no part in this, and I kind of think somewhere he did.
I just don't, my pushback, I just don't like the idea of a God that arranges the rape of a
I
innocent.
agree.
Was it
I
God or
don't
was
believe
it consequences of man's choices to walk away from
Right.
God's way? I think more than anything,
Yeah.
because it's just like today. You can't say, oh, God sent that hurt, sent AIDS to punish gay people, that,
Right.
and that's kind of a poor example, but
No, it's,
it's, people said that, and it's kind of similar, like
yeah.
God allows creation to operate on its own to some extent,
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
that's the
What about
reason for
Tamar?
that
That's the-
verse you brought up.
Tamar, she's the victim in this.
Yeah.
I hold to, I think from what I see in Jesus, especially a lot of the minor prophets, that God's heart bends toward the poor, the oppressed, those with no voice. And so when I read this story, I think if Tamar is where God is
it's hard.
in this, not that I don't believe in a God that would use Tamar to punish David, or would sacrifice Tamar's life and personhood for David. But it says, I will do this. So it's not that that's a bad interpretation. It's there in the text. I just don't believe in that God.
I
He
agree.
kills Bathsheba's baby to punish David, so it could be. I don't think they really tell us enough to know one way or the other.
Yeah, so I'm going to open a can of worms here on this. And this is biblical interpretation. This is like authority of the text. And this is difficult. So I think the question I have to ask is, did God kill the baby? Or did the person who wrote this book think God killed the baby?
Oh, yeah.
Because the baby may have died natural causes.
Because-
regardless.
I
Yeah.
think
Because
he
you
allowed
live-
the baby to die.
You live in a world
Yeah.
where, so we see there's a lot of just blatant male patriarchy in our Old Testament that, after Jesus, we know is utterly wrong.
Right.
Yet, in a lot of the First Testament, that's what God propped up, right? But now we know that's not what God does. Slavery in the First Testament is the same thing. Not just in the First Testament, Paul says, slaves, obey your masters. Yet today we know this is not what we believe is to be the Word of God, right? And so the worldview that these biblical authors write from, we don't escape it. The Word of God comes within that worldview. And if you have a worldview that just assumes people will always be slaves and there's no answer to that, then God comes in to encourage within that worldview slowly carrying you out. So if you have a worldview that says everything happens by God's hand, no exceptions, and a baby dies, then there can be no other answer besides this happens at God's hand. And so now we don't attribute everything to God when a baby dies or a hurricane comes or a flood happens on the earth. Some of those things just happen, but our worldview has changed in such that we don't think those things are God. And I think we're right to say that. I don't.
So, Jacob, is that a Baptist view or a Christian view?
Which one?
I was raised a Presbyterian, and I always wondered what George meant when I happened to make a comment to him in a conversation that my grandmother, I remember over and over again, when things would happen, she said, God has a plan. God was responsible for everything.
Yeah.
God, and I mean, and he made the comment to me, well, that was very Presbyterian of her. I didn't really know how to take that. I didn't, and I didn't question it. I just kind of moved on. But so the comment you're right. So because I was raised that way. God, there's a plan, and God is
Right.
part of that. Is orchestrating that plan. I mean, that was the way I was raised. So is the view you're stating, is that you view that's a Christian view or a Baptist way of looking at it?
Both. Both. But I don't think the other is not a Christian view or a Baptist view.
Sort of a
I think
John
there's
Calvin
room.
view, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think there's room in there for all of us.
And
Because I mean, there's a number of covenants as we've gone along that God strikes with various members of the Old Testament.
Right.
And each time it appears that the covenant is broken. They don't live up to the requirements.
Right.
And I'm thinking that brings us to the New Testament and Jesus. And so I guess I keep thinking there's a learning process here going on.
Yeah.
By God.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most
So-
difficult conversations or quite. I think where we do biblical authority and how we interpret it is just so difficult. And the Bible's what makes it difficult. Makes it really difficult. And I don't know where George is coming from, and I'll let him defend himself there. But I'll say, mine is simple in the beginning and gets harder as I look at all the implications. But from the God I see in Jesus, I believe Jesus is the most accurate, the truest revelation of God, the final word, which means truer than anything else, right? Truer than creation. Creation is a revelation of God. Jesus is truer. The Bible, God is revealed in the Bible, and Jesus is truer. So Jesus stands up above all other of God's revelations. So when I look through Jesus, when I see who God is in Jesus, and I look at the world, hurricanes and things like that, I can't see Jesus doing those things. And that hasn't been my experience. And here's where it gets really difficult for me, and this is just me. Please do not think I'm telling you this is what you have to believe, or this is just one person sharing his perspective. When I read the Old Testament, and I read some of the things that our Old Testament writers attribute to God, it's very difficult for me to see Jesus doing those things. One of them being bringing ruin on David's family because of a wrong David committed. It doesn't seem just from where I sit. It doesn't seem like something Jesus would do. So you have people in the First Testament, not the First Testament, first few centuries of the church that have this same problem. Marcions are a really good example of them, who rather than say the Bible comes from a particular place and a particular setting and the biblical authors can only write within their worldviews, Marcion decides God in the Old Testament is either one, a different God than Jesus, or two, the God in the Old Testament has changed significantly and grown, and this God that we see in Jesus is a new God, which the church says this is heresy. So they maintain, despite the tension, that the God of the Old Testament and Jesus is the same God, but they don't really tell us how exactly to do that. So it gets really, really difficult for me to look back and see Jesus doing some of the things. So what I do, and this may be a cop-out, and you may go home and think of 10 reasons that this is a bad thing to do, and that's great. But what I do is say, this is what these people thought, in the same way that Paul writes from what he thinks and feels and believes. And God is in there to be found. Absolutely. And these stories are inspired. But that doesn't mean they're... So, example, David writes a psalm after he rapes Bathsheba that says, against you and you alone, God, have I sinned. It's completely wrong. No, he raped Bathsheba. It's against Bathsheba that he wronged and sinned. So these words are inspired. God is in them. The good news is there to be distilled. Sometimes it's hard, but it's there. But that doesn't mean that everything David wrote in the Bible is accurate or right. He's wrong sometimes. He raped Bathsheba, not God.
Murdered Uriah.
He murdered Uriah. There's some other, he hurt other people. And just because in the Bible, David wrote, it's only against God that I sin, doesn't mean that's the word of God. It's really, I think, really challenged.
Yeah, really.
Not at all what I'm needed here to talk about today.
Yeah, no, but this is a good conversation. And you said David's family meeting ruined. There's been many families before that. Saul's family, Eli and his sons. I mean, you go back and so I thought God had a hand in those plans.
I'm not saying he doesn't.
That's, you know.
I'm just saying I'm having trouble with it.
Yeah.
I feel like God
Well, I'll
got
tell you when
surprised.
Chad came.
I feel like he didn't know everything in advance. That even God observed what we did as time went by and was maybe like, oh, I didn't know they would do that.
God's plan is to give us free will, which means that we can make bad choices that bring
There are
harm and bad.
consequences, and there are consequences that go with it.
Yeah.
So, we got just a couple of minutes. I really enjoyed that part of the conversation. And without wrapping that up at all, I'm going to move us back to the table.
Okay. It's already
Just
in
leave
the
you swimming in that other stuff. But I think it's important, especially as we talk about the Tamar text. It's like I said, there's no redemption in this story. There's rape. There's a brother that murders a brother. There's a brother who tries to kill his father and then ends up being killed by one of his father's best friends. This is not a story of redemption. There are no rights in this. Everyone is wrong. Everyone is wrong. The redemption, like the Alamo, even if that's a cheesy way of putting it, comes from what we do with the story. I think one of the things the story testifies to is, one, the power of the woman telling her story. So we know we have really interesting brain research now that actually came about because of 12-step programs. So one of the things they do in a 12-step program often is tell their stories. So you can go to an AA meeting, and sometimes, not every meeting, sometimes they're talking about specific steps, but you'll have a person stand in the front and share their story, their hope experience. And so we know decades after AA started doing that, said this is essential to recovery. We now have the brain research to know that telling your story with new insights to, and this is really important, to people who can be trusted with it, literally rewrites the pathways in brain chemistry, your brain chemistry. Literally.
You
It's
can't
not
correct what you don't admit exists.
And so merely telling the story can, up to 50% drop your feelings of guilt, shame. That's why sharing, James has this story in this verse that says, confess your sins one to another and pray for each other that you may be healed. Mm-hmm. Spiritual wisdom from 2,000 years ago, but we now have the brain science to say, yeah, you spiritual teachers knew what you were talking about. When you share your story, whether it's your fault or someone else's, you can expect almost a 50% reduction in the negative feelings associated with those stories or
That's a
those
big thing in
events.
grief
Yes,
recovery.
in grief.
Is telling your story, and
Telling your
I
story.
can testify to it. Every time I shared the story of Adam's death, it was like a
Thank you.
tiny little bit
Right.
of that grief lifted.
And it's not an easy thing to do, especially if your story is Tamar's, or so many of the women who took years and years or decades
Yes.
to be able to share their stories. And so what I think is incredible is that our biblical text tells these stories. It doesn't clean them up, doesn't fix them, preserves the tension in them. And sometimes that tension is from the character of God. Like, what is God's role in this? What's God's doing? That's the tension. And the text doesn't try to make it all look pretty. It just tells the story as faithfully as it can. And that has to be enough sometimes. That these aren't pushed under the rug. That Tamar isn't ignored or this story left out of the text because it doesn't make David look like a mighty man of God or something like that. It preserves it. So, any questions before we turn out the best that are not about how I don't think God did?
You don't want to get into predestination?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to just wipe that middle part out of that video so that some
No,
church
that-
doesn't
thank
see
you.
that?
That was-
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Let's-
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Jacob.
Thanks, Jason.
Let's go through the prayer request. Traveling mercies for Barbara Peterson, who's leaving today.
Yes,
John.
well, she's leaving 11 o'clock. I think.
11 o'clock.
Yeah.
She's on the plane.
She's
She's
getting ready to work at
Lord of the
Where'd you
plane.
go? Great.
Okay, Vicki, what is this? Pray for the,
I had some more tests on Friday, so I'm just hoping Monday or Tuesday they can tell me why
okay,
I have no strength, no energy, and,
thank you.
yeah.
Very good, very good. And praise for Carolyn's recovery and safe,
Carolyn
safe travel.
Strickland.
Yes, she went to her granddaughter's graduation in Arkansas,
Oh,
which is why she's not here today.
Okay.
She drove up there, so
She's good.
she got out of the hospital and hit the road.
Yes, yes. That's a good thing. Is there anything else to add to this list?
I'd like to
Yeah,
offer
just-
thankful, grateful to God that this week they and all of us going to her daughter's graduation.
Oh, fantastic.
Not only that, she found a job.
Where are you traveling to?
David's in North Carolina.
North Carolina, good.
And she just found out she got a fellowship in Tanzania. She's worked in Africa. This is her 4th time, but she had a paid fellowship and she's going to do health and humanitarian work. So.
Wow.
Wonderful.
She's a
This is
good
good
kid.
because I feel like that's do something for people
Yeah.
and
She got that from my dad.
Has anyone heard of Virginia Ross's daughter's story? Virginia Ross's daughter had triple bypass and a heart valve replacement about a week and a half ago. Didn't know if anyone had heard how she was doing. Something did.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else?
Hey, so was gonna be back, but she can't get rid of this stuff. She thought she was well. She has asthma too, and she's a little bit upset.
I'll bet.
Getting cranky, but it just drags on. So she's surviving, but
We'll hope she gets better soon.
I have one. I guess for a request for my friend Matt, who he had a collapsed lung recently, but he's been in the hospital and everything. But they sent him home yesterday with a clean bill of health, but still but still just in case, like any kind of repercussions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.